Well, it's great to be back. It's great to be back home for me, and to talk about this odd little corner of the world, which I seem to be more and more been involved with all the time. I wanted to get right into so I wanted to get right into the question of the matter, and actually this policy lab, which Tom suggested, the title is something that is currently or has been currently discussed in Costa Rica for a number of new matters, particularly regarding climate change policy, and I will tell you a little bit more about it. But I want to first establish whether is it true that we are a sustainable development policy lab, and how can we establish that? So I'm going to go back in history. I think we can claim that, and I'm going to use history to support it. First on the list is where we were the third city in Latin America to be lightened by electricity. This was after Campos in Brazil and Santiago de Chile in 1884. And the curious thing about it, to the detriment of our friend Maida, it was a hydropower plant back then. We started a fairly stable elections, follow-up of elections since 1889. Before that, it was creative learning about democracy in many ways, shapes, and fashions. We had a social welfare system that pretty much was established in the 40s. Army was, and this is a very significant thing for our region, Army was abolished in 1949, and our protected area system, that's beyond isolated national parks, began in the 1970s. So that's my beginning of that claim of why we are indeed a lab, a sustainable development lab. The origin of the protected areas system, which is kind of like our anchorage, it's what gave us that start to begin with, is in a context where what was happening in Latin America and what was going on in Costa Rica at the time was on the opposite direction. What was happening was we were in what's called our street piece, and I'll show it all to you. We began to deforest most of our land base, and it was progressing in the late 60s, early 70s when first protected areas were created. So they were created in areas that were already part of the agricultural frontier, or where farmers had to be displaced in order to create those protected areas. So that tells you a little bit of what were the disputes at the time. What's interesting about the connection between the welfare state and protected area system is that it, contrary to what you would associate with the welfare state, which is the development of industry and the development of major national projects, conservation in the case of Costa Rica became that way to modernize. So having national parks was a way to modernize the country, to give it a sort of Western flair, to be like Europe or be like the United States in particular, as these parks were modeled in the Yellowstone fence-off type of conservation. We moved into the 80s, which is our lost decade and the decade of the debt and the big crisis. And deforestation continued, that is, that the rest of the development of the country was oriented in the opposite way of conservation. However, the park system that had been established in the previous decade was expanding. One of the reasons, odd reasons why it expanded, it's because north of Costa Rica we had Nicaragua, the rebel daughter of Central America. During the 80s, just as the debt crisis was hitting all the countries, the revolution, the Sandinista revolution had won in Nicaragua, and Costa Rica became the tacit and not so tacit ally of the Department of State, particularly Reagan government at the time. And it was very important for that foreign policy, the U.S. foreign policy, that right across the border from Nicaragua, you had a country that was absolute opposite. It was the good behaving, the goody two-shoes country. One of the things that allowed it to give it that image was the fact that on top of everything else, the welfare, the good education system, the democracy, we also had this very modern thing called national parks and a conservation policy. So a lot of the aid that came as part of that Cold War politics was directed for conservation. And this is a very singular thing because while in the rest of the region, this last decade and the next decade will be remembered as the Washington consensus years, where the goal was to get rid of the state, get rid of what it did to the bare minimum. In the case of Costa Rica, conservation and other welfare state institutions remained, and which is kind of like a paradox, given that the context, the general political context, was different. But that is significant in what will happen next. And this is that through the late 80s and across the 90s, we started regaining forest cover. The reason being that while before we deforested so that particularly small farmers would have land for agricultural production, those that type of development, rural development, became old-fashioned under this new model of the competitive advantages, the idea of focusing on what you were good at and not good at agriculture at all, except bananas, later pineapples, as you can tell from going towards probably if it's not from Ecuador, it's from Costa Rica, pineapple. So conservation at this point, because we're losing that connection to agriculture and we're re-engaging our economic orientation, conservation becomes not a central part of that sort of sectorial policy, but a central part of the economic development of the country. And therefore, it gradually becomes part of the identity of the citizens. So it becomes a cultural thing out on top of the policy economic activity. During that, learning to use this thing. Okay. During the 90s, and trying to bring some more coherence to this sort of shift in economic development orientation, you started to see things that made sense or that accompanied that initial conservation effort around protected areas. The first one being ecotourism. And ecotourism really started around the year 1990. Senor Allen, why is that year so important in Costa Rican history? And what event put us in the global arena? Yes, we won the Nobel Prize, but everybody does this. Claro, World Cup. Exactly. We made it to the World Cup in 1990. And that, yes, oye, I was still casi la falla. Anyway, Tom, you had your hand up?
Never mind. I said that's what I first went.
Anyway,
yeah.
Tourism started along that same period. So all these things, this does serendipitous events all got the attention of the rest of the world towards this little corner, and those initial initiatives that had started way 20 years before were now part of this what gave the country a brand, a seal of what it was about. Because the protected area system had been created more out of the good intention than out of the actual measurement of our capacity to manage those protected areas. The concern of the founders of the system has always been, up to today, the finance of those protected areas. And because of that concern, because we're always behind paying for the land and paying to the communities and to the rest of the stakeholders, and adequately managing our protected areas, finance is the critical element. And that has driven most of that innovation policy and that laboratory that I'm talking about. One of the first things that was looked upon as an alternative source of funding for the protected area system, that is, pay for the parks and their costs, was bioprospecting. This was the search of compounds and plants and insects and natural compounds that could be used in the pharmaceutical industry. At the time, it was a very controversial issue because, among other things, Costa Rica has very little endemism. So most of what you can find in Costa Rica, you can find in the rest of the region. Therefore, it was making businesses, making deals with something that was actually not or could not be claimed as completely Costa Rica. On top of that, this organization, INVIO, the Institute of Biodiversity, National Institute of Biodiversity, was not, as you could infer from its name, a public institution. It was a private association made up by people very close to the government. Therefore, it had that public aura. But in reality, the reason why it was a private institution had a lot to do with the politics of those years, in which the state was the problem, and it was seen as a very ineffective way of getting things done, including conservation. Therefore, it was created as a private entity that had this public needs, regular NGO, but that it was negotiating with the sovereign resources of the biodiversity. Another area where there was experimentation in the same sense of trying to bring money in was through the development of the payment for environmental services, which is a regional name for what we know now or discuss now as RED. Two curious things about the payment is that because of the politics of the policies of that time, because of that national Washington consensus, all the subsidies, all these economic subsidies in the country were eliminated. One of the subsidies that was that sort of helped the forest industry survive was this subsidy to reforestation. What they did, the industry, the forest industry, and the government, was that they changed the name of the subsidy and they turned it into a payment for environmental services. Actually, the price, the initial price of what was paid as environmental service for a hectare of forest was calculated based on the amount that the foresters would get from the government subsidy. It was basically changing the name, accommodating it to this forest, but it was the same effect. It was providing a transfer of money from the state to the private sector. That's how it began. It has been modified and has changed in the 20 so years that it had in effect. Something else that it's now very significant. It wasn't looked at the time as part of that conservation policy, but it's definitely part of our climate policy now. A considered part is the diversification of the electricity matrix. And this is just a picture of a region in Costa Rica where, well, in one single shot, you can get a solar plant, a geothermal plant, and a wind park, wind turbine park. And this is one little district, one little shot. So we now have, we've had for the last 3 years, at least half of the year of 100% renewable energy. And yes, it includes hydropower, which question the benefits, or you can have to be very aware of the impacts it has, but it is considered renewable. Hasta ahora, no? So these are some of the things that I think help reinforce the idea that yes, we are a policy lab. As a result, from the 20-something% that we had back in the 80s, we're now in a forest cover of over 50%, and it's still growing, not as fast as it was, but it should be now around 54%. And that is that tendency, or that transformation of the economy has even sustained economic crisis like the one we had late in the previous decade. Now, the following question, I think, is whether it's good to be a lab. Is it worth it? Is it positive? What do you think? Think it's only good? What could be some of the setbacks of being a policy lab? Yes. Uh-huh. You make mistakes. Have failures. Yes. You go. You fail and everybody noticed. Well, I sort of thinking along those lines, risks, failures. Sometimes there's learning, but sometimes not. Most of the time there's not, at least at the institutional level. But there's also many embarrassments. I will just mention there's a number of disappointments going on all the time, and there's plenty of drama. So it's not as good as it sounds. It's not just good. Wow, what happened?
It's part of the drama thing.
Clearly, somebody talking about.
It's risky.
It is.
Yeah, that's good.
You're paying attention. How easy.
It wasn't a complete bag.
Bien. Now let me give you the example of the embarrassment. This is the envío that I just mentioned, and for the past 3 years, it's been in the process of closure, bankruptcy and closure. And you have to remember that originally this was sold as the model for the rest of not just the region, not just Central America or Latin America, but the whole tropics. This was the way to be part of, you know, the market economy, the market conservation. EBO collapsed on itself. No external force besides the fact that it wasn't able to raise money as it had before, until it got completely closed. Of course, there was a big initiative to save it as a national treasure, and that created a long-standing debate that is still going on. But basically, what happened is that the technological advances of the pharmaceutical companies, when moved ahead from this idea that you could have the cure to cancer and to other diseases coming from the forest. Now you can develop it through genetically all those elements. This is something that they did not took into account. They believed that their model was infallible. Again, not we are a lab, but sometimes we don't think we're a lab. We get that. This was one case where they denied that there was a change in the context, that there was a change in the conditions that allowed in vivo to grow on those plants. The second example is one where one that's very curious, and it was very hard to understand as it was developing. This is the complete Costa Rican treaties with the rehab period where we regain the forest. And this image is not only one of the most popular in any environmental history of Costa Rica, but it was critical in its climate policy. I will tell you a minute more about it. But the thing that brings science into this story of forest cover is that the way that this map was established, the original sources, were among the first, back in the 80s, among the first uses of remote sensing to establish forest cover. So looking at it from now, it was a very rudimentary use of that technology. So it was very cutting edge at that time. But now, revising it and looking at it with the technology that we have today, it was clearly established last year that Costa Rica never went below 40% forest cover. So what that means, besides the original, two things about this that are very important. One is that politics is so stuck on that image that accepting that this was true is still impossible. I mean, I can show this to technical staff and to conservation policymakers, and there will be a major debate. And there are supposed to be studies that refute this sort of new data. The fact is that this is from the review of a good set of panel of remote sensors and scientists more accurate than that ever was. And accepting that is a very difficult thing. The one thing that complicates or makes this the disappointing story is that for climate change purposes, if we went down as low as 21% in 87, but we're up to 53% in 2010, that means that all that forest is new forest. And all that carbon could be claimed as carbon that we, within this sort of innovative policies, have been able to store. Therefore, we should be compensated through RED or other means for that major, that significant change. So part of what the government of Costa Rica has sold as part of its climate change policy is that it has stored that much carbon. That's why in 2009, it was able to claim that it was 20% short of being carbon neutral, the country. It was based on that idea. If that is not true, and we were never below 40, that means that what we're able to accomplish through this sort of creative policies is not that significant. Therefore, we don't have that new carbon to claim at that international scene. Now here, technology and research and studies with modern things and the use of the actual engagement of Costa Rica as a lab is very significant in revealing this. This is what a lab should do. But you expect that it happens, that new information brings data.
It's important to recognize that forest cover is not a binary variable. There's no such thing as is good forest cover. Okay, so the whole argument is based on a kind of a false vision.
But it informs policy as if it is. That's one thing. And the other thing is that it's associated with the fact that these areas have been lost to agriculture. So there's binary in the sense that you don't have a competitive activity in those areas. So these are not coffee plantations that are taken as forests, which are original structure. These are big lands that have been reforested because there's really no alternative to its alternative to use.
I remember going to India and the guy pointed to that's a forest. There's nothing on there because it's owned by the forest department, and that makes it a forest. You can have a lot of definitions.
Yeah. Well, in this case, the most critical component of the definition is the fact that it would to calculate the amount of stored carbon because it was.
How would they use without the expiring?
No say.
It's more about how they classify the image.
Yes.
Just pretty much saying it's greatness and stuff. Hansen uses 5 years for that.
Yeah. So this is where you can begin to see that difference of that use. This is the biannual report of emissions in Costa Rica, and you can see how almost 40% of the growth in the amount of emissions is due to the reduction in the forest absorption. That's the negative effect of the forest in the emissions. And we haven't had deforestation, significant deforestation. We do have regional changes in land use, smaller. But there's really no way of going to the field and verifying what happened here. What really happened was that we measured things differently from the way that it was done originally. Another area where you see the drama of having a lab is with regards to the definition, bless you, the definition of the nationally determined contribution. And this is what each country had to turn in for the Paris Agreement. Its own commitment of how many emissions it would reduce to 2050 and 2080. Basically, what you want is you want to have a trajectory that goes down. So as you develop, you're going to reduce that amount, your current amount of emissions. Ideally, you should hit this line, which was, in our case, the carbon neutrality concept, which we had bragged about since 2000, 9. Now, when you use traditional modeling and projections of what you could do to reduce those emissions, what you had is this graph here. And what I wanted to underline is that none of these lines looks like this. They never go down. So if you use modeling and more econometric type of approaches, you were going to get, this is what you were going to get. You might get to reduce it, but will never get to meet the goal. So at the time, it was a very contentious process to try to convince some of the authorities and some of the technicians to complement this more traditional way of developing or identifying this target with one that eventually got us to this proposal, which is what we presented in Paris. What was done is that with the limited information that gave us those graphics that all went up, that was complemented with scenario development. And here we're using, on the one hand, more quantitative approaches and more traditional econometric forecasting tools with more descriptive and qualitative development tools like scenario development to establish where and how is that goal that we want to establish beyond what we can measure in numbers. So that's how this scenario of emissions was established. Again, what I wanted to strike is the fact that it was through a very contentious process where a lot of the people that have been used to data to control power and to hold to their positions had really struggled for this change to happen, to get to this point in our development as a lab. The one thing that's important about us being a lab, beyond it being bad and sometimes embarrassing, sometimes very dramatic, is the fact that it has been open for engagement. And one of the organizations that has played a key role in that engagement, in telling us what is happening in those ecosystems and what is going, how truthful is or how effective in our conservation policies has been the OTS. Here's a list of documents on the history of OTS in Costa Rica. And I just wanted to point out that Hugh Poppeno, former professor of UF, is part of that list, just as many others have been. Just that he was president of something in the board. But OTS has been very significant in providing that information of actually using Costa Rica as a lab and then creating the references and the information that has been sometimes yes and sometimes not used to develop the policy. But it has played a significant, very significant role. OTS was established, curiously enough, during the heatest moment in the Cold War. This is right after the Castro Revolution, and as a result of the fact that the Harvard University was kicked out of the Havana Gardens, and a lot of the developers of tropical ecology needed a country where they could develop their science and research. the winner of the raffle was Costa Rica for the reasons that I just explained. But OTS has played since a very significant role in providing that information, bringing it to the country as a lab, as a place to develop science. One of those uses of science has been for the last 16 years. Our program, our TCD Law School Costa Rica Environmental Law program, and the approach originally, Tom came into Costa Rica back in the 90s to help us develop policies. Some of those policies that I referred to, and later that relationship developed into organizations. Among them, the development of environmental law centers in all the countries of Central America, being Sedarena, the Costa Rican Environmental Law Center, that still is working. It's a very established NGO. Back in 2001, I think, Tom began the clinic, or took the clinic idea and to turn it into the summer program with UCR, and since has moved to OTS. The idea since has been to engage with the policymakers and with the stakeholders in many of those contentious things that involve conservation policy and sustainable development and development in general, to craft and to conduct field research of different kinds, not just traditional develop your dissertation, although a lot of our classmates have developed their dissertation or help develop their dissertation program. I wanted to mention some of those ways in which this program, through that broader collaboration network, has engaged the country's policies and conservation issues. This is the presentation session from last year's projects, this year's program. I'm sorry, it's past now. It's past summer. And we had. I'm going to go from bottom to the top. We had a project focused on enforcing hunting laws and all that's required to process poachers and hunters, particularly in national parks, and that was through a colleague of ours and alumni of Wildlife Department, Ronita Meat, that helped us with it, and this is going to continue through this year, hopefully through the support of the Fish and Wildlife Service. We looked at the development of food councils in Costa Rica, and it's interesting because the food council idea, which is focused on urban sustainability, was generated here in the States, but we were able to find a similar legislation, a similar council idea at the county level in the Costa Rican legislation. So there was a bridge there that could build. It wasn't exactly the same thing, but there was that same opportunity. And again here, the idea of doing comparative work between what goes on in Costa Rica and what goes on in Florida and the States in general becomes great learning opportunity. So the program has always had a number of Costa Rican law students participate, mostly law students, also been from other disciplines. But that has also helped in establishing those relationships. Two other projects that I would like their participants, their developers to describe it, are the creation of the Amazon Indigenous Digital Network that Maida and Neva could tell us a little bit more, and the development of protected area law for Equatorial Guinea that has been helped us develop. So Maida, you want to talk about a little bit about your project?
Very quickly, yeah, I think that the time is kind of limited, so I don't want to steal from you. But we are going to actually present that next Tuesday, chocolate lunch. So Nate and I left here and we worked with Betty and Cynthia, Professor Cynthia Simon, Tom, and from we left UF with an idea of creating some sort of network in Brazil, like a indigenous rights clinic. And when we were in Costa Rica and spent a month there, we were able to come together, our brains, and thinking of the Amazon is so huge, and how we can actually, how much money we would spend to work with all these tribes and to do something sustainable. And that's how we came up with the Indigenous Rights Digital Network, which is basically creating an online platform where we can gather all these beautiful ideas and all these people doing amazing work, but they're not connected. So we have a lot of universities or students or nonprofits or government institutions that are doing good work, but they don't really know about everyone. And sometimes the people that need the work done doesn't know whom to ask. So we were thinking, creating a place and a space where we can gather all this data and just connect people that are doing something with the people that need something to be done. And that is honestly just a tiny little piece of the project. It means a lot more. It involves the idea of self-service learning, bringing students to the Amazon, bringing Amazonian indigenous people to come here to UF, but also hopefully connecting with OTS as well, and doing a more broad sort of network to work towards empowering indigenous communities and having that as a tool for indigenous rights now in Brazil, but broaden up to other places. And we will detail it better on.
Yeah.
So yeah, the project in Costa for this. So basically, it's a project developed WGCS, this NGO, and US. It's basically an analysis and a proposal to improve the governance and the law of protected areas in Equatorial Guinea. This in a very complicated, institutional, political, environmental context. So basically, we had 3 phases. The first phase was in Costa Rica. We got together with also this person from Costa Rica also went to Costa Rica, and we started like this preliminary phase of analysis, secondary data, and then in the second phase, we basically went to the field, went to the Costa Rica, made interviews, saw what's going on the ground, and then we came back and said, okay, let's start making the draft law and the proposal to actually, like a proposal for governance, not only governance in terms of like participation, because in the Costa Rica it's very complicated, but also in terms of law and how to manage institutions that exist and institutions that could exist, which are based. But yeah, that's basically what.
To close it up, I wanted to show you the video that Ivan, Maida's husband, helped us or developed for us in this past summer.